Let's begin Chapter 2 of Gregory Mankiw's Principles of Macroeconomics, Thinking Like an Economist. In this chapter, we will ask, what are economists' two roles? How do they differ? What are models? How do economists use them? What are the elements of the circular flow diagram? What concepts does the diagram illustrate? How is the production possibilities frontier related to opportunity cost? What is the difference between microeconomics and macroeconomics, between positive and normative? Economists generally play two roles. First, they are scientists. They're trying to explain the world. Market activity, interaction, exchange, it's a social phenomenon, and it's one that we try to understand. Examples of this might be, what is the effect of wages on unemployment? What is the effect of tax cuts on economic growth? What is the effect of investment in capital on general standards of well-being? Here, we're trying to discover the way the world is, make statements about what is true about it, and how we can interact with economic phenomenon. Secondly, economists function as policy advisors. Again, economics is a social phenomenon, and to govern ourselves at the social level, we have governments. Economists then play the role of advising on various policies that might be used to tweak or influence the economy. For instance, what taxes should be in play, what policies should be invented to raise general well-being, so on and so forth. In the first role, that of scientists, economists must employ the scientific method. The scientific method, generally defined, is the dispassionate development and testing of theories and how the world works. There are a few key steps in the scientific method that I'd like you to be familiar with. The first is observation of phenomenon. The second step is to create a hypothesis about phenomenon. The third step is to gather data on the phenomenon. And the fourth step is to test your hypothesis. The biggest key to using these steps is this word dispassionate. The idea here is that when we generate a hypothesis and then go through the stages of testing it, that we ultimately want to arrive at truth. We don't select data to aid in having our hypothesis conform to our political or otherwise biases. We want to be dispassionate without bias in the formulation of a hypothesis, in the acquisition of data by which we will test the hypothesis, and in the hypothesis test itself. As you go through college, you will take classes that help you to discover and utilize the scientific method. For instance, your statistics class will help teach you how to gather data in a dispassionate way. As scientists, economists will often rely on models and assumptions. Assumptions simplify the complex world and they make it easier to understand. Example, to study international trade, we might assume that there are only two countries and only two goods. This is unrealistic, but it's simple to learn and gives us insights into the real world. A model is a highly simplified representation of a more complicated reality. Economists use models to study economic issues all the time. We'll look at two models in this chapter. One of them, the circular flow model, and another, the production possibilities frontier. What are some models you're already familiar with? Well, a roadmap. It is a highly simplified representation of the geographical landscape that is designed to give you predictive information about moving from point A to point B in navigating. Yeah? It doesn't include all of the trees and all of the clouds and all of the mountains and all the rivers. It includes only what is useful about explaining the reality that you're trying to achieve an end in, such as getting to point B. Another model you might be familiar with is a model of human anatomy from maybe your high school biology class, depicting the whole organism of the human being broken down into its constituent organs and how they relate and how the blood flows through to give us an idea of the role of each part of the body and the function of each part of the body that makes the whole function as it does. Our first model can be akin to that biological model. It is called the circular flow diagram. The circular flow diagram is our visual model of the economy. It shows how dollars flow through the economy and also how real goods and services flow through the economy. We'll make some simplifications of the macroeconomy as we build the circular flow diagram. Our first simplification will be that there are only two types of actors. One, households, and two, firms. We'll also assume that these households and firms interact primarily in two markets. One, the market for goods and services, and two, the market for what we'll call the factors of production. And the factors of production we'll learn are the inputs into any productive process, things like labor, natural resources, tools, and machines. Our factors of production, more specifically, are the resources that the economy uses to produce. Generally, we'll aggregate these differential resources into three general categories: labor, land, which we'll use to call natural resources, and capital, physical capital. This physical capital are the tools, the buildings, the machines that are used in production. Figure 1, the circular flow diagram. We've got firms, we've got households. Households can be characterized as those entities which own the factors of production, such as labor, and then sell or rent them to firms so that they can be used in production. Households, in turn, will receive income or remuneration for the factors of production that they let out to the firms. Households also buy and consume goods and services using the income that they've received from selling in the market for the factors of production, from contributing to production in some fashion. Firms will buy or hire factors of production and use them to produce goods and services. A firm will hire workers, for instance, pay them salary, and then use their labor to produce goods and services that will be sold. Firms then sell the goods and services in the market for factors of production. Who do they sell them to? They sell them to households. Here is our circular flow diagram. Let's break this down piece by piece. I want you to start with the red lines in the interior of the circular flow diagram. Let's talk about, the market for goods and services. Looking at the market for goods and services and moving just to the left, you'll see the red arrow moving from firms to the market for goods and services. This arrow is to indicate that firms are selling goods and services in the market for goods and services. This is firm output. Moving below the firm box, we see that this output must come from somewhere, and where it comes from are the factors of production, otherwise known as inputs. Firms transform inputs into outputs. Keep in mind that looking at this red arrow, we see that we're working from real factors of production, land, labor, and capital, transformed by firms into finished goods, which becomes real output. The market for the factors of production is where these real inputs get purchased and transferred from households to firms. Households supply land, labor, and capital to the market for the factors of production. Firms purchase those inputs and transform them into outputs which will be sold. Those outputs in turn move back to households, and what we see as this red line is a circuit of real economic activity, things producing things. The outside circuit, the green circuit, is a monetary representation of those real values that are created in production. If we move to the top left quadrant of the diagram, we see that for the output that firms have sold in the market for goods and services, they receive revenue. This revenue then is paid out in wages, rent, and profit. This wages, rent, and profit is the remuneration for the factors of production. Notice that each input has its own remuneration. Labor is paid wages, land is paid rent, and capital is paid profit. Collectively, wages, rent, and profit become income for households. Households then may use that income in spending in the market for goods and services. One interesting idea that is revealed from the circular flow diagram is that the act of producing generates sufficient income to purchase everything that was produced. This is oftentimes known as Say's law, the idea that production creates its own demand. We'll come back to this model in the future. It's a wonderful way of simply organizing macroeconomic activity. Our second model is the production possibilities frontier. The production possibilities frontier is a graph that shows the combinations of two goods the economy can possibly produce, given the available resources and the available technology. Let's do an example. Let's assume, for simplicity, that there are only two goods, computers and wheat. There's only one resource that society has to produce computers and wheat. We'll call it labor, and it's measured in terms of hours. There is a limited amount of labor hours available in the economy, creating scarcity. The economy has 50,000 labor hours per month that it can use to either produce computers, wheat, or some combination of the two. Let's graph this in a nice table. The PPF example. Producing one computer will require 100 hours of labor. Producing 1 ton of wheat requires 10 hours of labor. Let's move to the table and look at the second column underneath employment of labor hours and move to computers. Row A indicates that we are using all of our available labor hours in the production of computers and none of our labor hours in the production of wheat. Since it takes 100 hours of labor to produce a computer, the output or production of computers will be 500. This has been calculated by taking the 50,000 labor hours and dividing it by the 100 hours of labor that are required to produce a single computer. 50,000 divided by 100 gives us 500 computers. There are no hours devoted to wheat, and so our production of wheat will be 0 units of wheat. We can continue making the same calculation with the rest of the table. Let's move all the way down to row E. At row E, we are using 0 hours in the production of computers and all of our 50,000 labor hours in the production of wheat. Given that it takes 10 hours of labor to produce a unit of wheat, the 50,000 divided by 10 provides us with 5,000 units of wheat. Rows B, C, and D merely analyze how much we could produce of computers and wheat with varying degrees of distribution of labor hours between the two sectors. Row B gives us 40,000 hours of labor devoted to computers, divided by 100 gives us 400 computers. If we've used 40,000 hours in the production of computers, we still have 10,000 remaining hours of our total 50,000 hours that we can use in the production of wheat. Those 10,000 hours devoted to the production of wheat provides us with 10,000 divided by 10, 1,000 units of wheat. The same process has been calculated for row C and row D. And what we see here is that we can divide up our possible labor hours in various fashions between computers and wheat, but if we use all of those labor hours in the production of something, what we get is various combinations of computer and wheat. We can then graph this table, and points A, B, C, D, and E represent the calculations made in the previous slide. If we use all of our labor in the production of wheat and nothing in the production of computers, we are at point E, 5,000 units of wheat and 0 units of computers. Row A was when we used all of our labor hours in the production of computers and applied none of it to the production of wheat, in which case we got no wheat, but we got 500 units of computers. B, C, and D represent different allocations of the total amount of labor between wheat and also computer production. Do note that every point on that line is again what is possible for us to produce, assuming that we've used all of our labor in the production of something. Let's learn a little bit more about what this PPF represents. On the graph, find the point that represents 100 computers and 3,000 tons of wheat. Label it F. Would it be possible for the economy to produce this combination of the two goods? Why or why not? Our second little exercise will ask us to find the point that represents 300 computers and 3,500 tons of wheat. Label it G. Would it be possible for the economy to produce this combination of two goods? Point F, 100 computers and 3,000 tons of wheat. Point F requires 40,000 hours of labor. It is possible, but it's not efficient. We still have 10,000 hours of labor that could be used to produce either more wheat or more computers. The fact that we're not using these hours means that we're not operating up to our potential. We're not operating efficiently. Point F is possible, it's feasible, but it's not efficient. We could get more of either good without sacrificing any of the other. If we are dealing with a point inside the production possibilities frontier, we know that that combination of goods is not utilizing all of our productive resources and is by definition inefficient. Point G, 300 computers and 3,500 tons of wheat, is a combination of goods and services that we simply don't have enough labor hours to produce. It's not possible. We only have 50,000 hours of labor. Producing at point G would require 65,000 hours of labor. It is not possible, it is not feasible underneath the current resource constraints. What do we know so far about the PPF? Well, points on the PPF, like A and E, are on the line. And being on the line, they represent combinations of output that are not only possible, but also efficient. Why efficient? Because we're using all of our available resources. Points under the PPF, like point F, are possible, but they're not efficient. Some resources are underutilized, i.e., workers are unemployed, factories are idle. Points above the PPF, like point G, are simply not possible. They require too much inputs for what we have available to us. The PPF can allow us to understand more about our key concept, opportunity cost. We defined opportunity cost as what must be given up in order to get something. Moving along the PPF involves shifting resources from production of one good to production of the other. In this process, we will gain more of one good, but necessarily lose some of the other. We can now quantify that trade-off, quantify that opportunity cost. Society faces a trade-off. Getting more of one good requires sacrificing the other. The slope of the PPF will tell us the opportunity cost of one good in terms of the other. A handy rule of thumb here is that the slope of the line gives us the opportunity cost of the good on the x-axis. Let's look at this. The PPF and opportunity cost. If we are operating with no labor hours devoted to computers and all labor hours devoted to wheat, we get 5,000 tons. If we wanted to acquire an extra 100 computers, we would have to pull labor out of the production of wheat. In the process of doing so, we would lose 1,000 tons of wheat. Calculating the slope, rise over run, shows us that the slope is negative, indicating that we will lose tons of wheat as we gain units of computers. This particular move has caused us to lose 1,000 tons of wheat in order to gain 100 computers. For each computer, then, we must have given up 10 units of wheat. The slope of a line equals the rise over the run, the amount the line rises when you move to the right by 1 unit. Here, the opportunity cost of a computer is 10 tons of wheat. The slope of the line, -10. Economic growth can affect the PPF. With additional resources or an improvement in technology, the economy can produce more computers or more wheat, or any combination of the two. This economic growth is modeled as the PPF shifting out. What was previously impossible or unfeasible now becomes possible and feasible. The two triggers or two reasons why we might see the PPF shift out to the right is 1, more inputs, or 2, using those inputs more effectively. This can happen through a change in technology. As we may learn later, trade may also allow us to consume outside of our PPF. The PPF, a summary. The PPF shows all combinations of two goods that an economy can produce, given its existing resources and existing technology. The PPF illustrates the cost of trade-off and opportunity cost, efficiency and inefficiency, unemployment and economic growth. Microeconomics versus macroeconomics. These are the two big, broad branches in economics. Microeconomics is the study of how households and firms make decisions and how they interact in markets. It's individuals and businesses and markets. Macroeconomics is the study of economy-wide phenomenon, including inflation, unemployment, and economic growth. These two branches of economics are closely intertwined yet distinct, and they address different questions. The economist functions as a policy advisor. As scientists, economists make statements which we call positive statements. A positive statement is the outcome of a scientific method. It's the statement of truth. It's a statement about the way the world is. As policy advisors, economists often make normative statements. Normative statements are statements based off of value judgments. They're oftentimes very subjective. Normative statements attempt to prescribe how the world should be or ought to be. Positive statements, based in fact, based in the scientific method, can either be confirmed or refuted through using the scientific method. Normative statements, because they are subjective, depend on values, often cannot be confirmed or refuted. For instance, vanilla ice cream is the best ice cream in the world. There's no way to confirm or refute that. It's simply a statement about values and preferences. Whereas the earth is flat is patently incorrect when compared to the evidence. We can confirm or refute positive statements, statements about the way the world is. We cannot do so with normative statements. Let's look at a few different examples of these to try to get a better understanding of the difference between positive statements and normative statements. Let's look at A. This statement says, prices rise when the government increases the quantity of money. Is this a positive statement? Is it a normative statement? Is it a statement about the way the world is, or a statement about a course of action, what should or ought to be? B. The government should print less money. Positive or normative statement? C. A tax cut is needed to stimulate the economy. Positive or normative statement? D. An increase in the price of burritos will cause an increase in consumer demand for music downloads. Let's reveal the answers and see how you did. Prices rise when the government increases the quantity of money. This is a positive statement. It describes a relationship of cause and effect between printing money and rising prices. We could use data to confirm or refute this statement. For instance, we could look at the rate of monetary growth through some historical period and then look at the effect of prices, correlating the two. B. The government should print less money. This was a normative statement. This is a value judgment. It can't be confirmed or refuted. C. A tax cut is needed to stimulate the economy. This is a normative statement. It's another value judgment. D. An increase in the price of burritos will cause an increase in consumer demand for music downloads. This again is a positive statement, describes a relationship, cause and effect between two variables. Even though it's a positive statement, a statement about the way the world is, it need not be true necessarily. And we can confirm or refute its validity, but it's still a positive statement. Economists, as scientists and policy advisors, oftentimes disagree. Economists often give conflicting policy advice. You'll see this all the time. It's one of the things that makes economics so interesting as a field. They sometimes disagree about the validity of alternative positive theories about the world. they may have different values and therefore different normative views about what policy should try to be accomplished. Although they differ, not only in their positive views and their underlying theories about the economy, but also about their values and normative views, there are many propositions about many economists agree. Let's look at rent ceilings reduce the quantity and quality of housing available. 93% of economists agree that if you have legal caps on rent, it discourages landlords from offering up places for rent or improving places, and it reduces the quantity and quality of housing available. Tariffs and import quotas usually reduce general economic welfare. These oftentimes redistribute gains, but ultimately what they do is raise the cost of inputs and cut off access to lower cost foreign goods. In general, this makes it more expensive to be a producer who relies on imports or a consumer who relies on imports, and thus reduces general economic welfare. The United States should not restrict employers from outsourcing work to foreign countries. 90% of economists agree that regardless of national identity, firms should be able to search the whole productive landscape for the most efficient inputs. The United States should eliminate agricultural subsidies. 85% of economists agree that spending money to prop up farmers and inefficient U.S. agriculture is probably a waste of money. The gap between Social Security funds and expenditures will become unsustainably large within the next 50 years if current policies remain unchanged. 85% agree that when the baby boomers retire, we're going to have a hard time funding Social Security. A large federal budget deficit has an adverse effect on the economy. 83% of economists agree that heavy burdens of government debt slow down economic growth. A minimum wage increases unemployment among the young and unskilled workers. 79% of economists agree that if you make unskilled workers more expensive, workers will hire fewer of them. Firms will hire fewer of them. Effluent taxes and marketable pollution permits represent a better approach to pollution control than imposing pollution ceilings. 78% of economists agree that if you use taxes and saleable or tradable pollution permits, that it creates private incentives to reduce pollution and clean up the manner in which you produce. Who studied economics? Well, you are. Who else? Ronald Reagan, President of the United States. Barbara Boxer, U.S. Senator. Sandra Day O'Connor, Supreme Court Justice. Let's move down here. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Governor of California and The Terminator. Ben Stein, political speechwriter, actor, and game show host. Mick Jagger, singer of the Rolling Stones. John Elway, NFL quarterback. Tiger Woods, professional golfer. And Diane von Furstenberg, the fashion designer. Let's look at what we've done so far. As scientists, economists try to explain the world using models with appropriate simplifying assumptions. Two simple models are the circular flow diagram and the production possibilities frontier. Microeconomics studies the behavior of consumers and firms and their interactions in markets. Macroeconomics, on the other hand, studies the economy as a whole. As policy advisors, economists offer advice on how to improve the world. That has been Chapter 2. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.